One of feminism's particularly dishonest responses to men's advocates is allegations of economic traditionalism.
Men's rights activism is just a backlash against women's progress by a bunch of fragile male egos afraid of having to compete with women in the workplace. It bothers you that feminism opened the workplace up for women. You just want to send them all back to the kitchen.
HBR Talk with Hannah Wallen. These feminists are really getting their stereotypes mixed up. The homemaker-only gender role is a recycled caricature of the middle-class traditionalist conservative family. There is no the kitchen to send women back to, even if there was a real interest in sending them back to it. And such an idea has nothing to do with men's rights. Anyone who has heard our positions on divorce, child custody, and child support would recognize that. We advocate for equal responsibility, something divorced mothers couldn't achieve without going to work. We promote this in relation to families because it's unequal treatment under the law to not just expect, but legally force the father to bear all of the financial responsibility for two separate households, while his ex-wife, the mother of his children, bears none. The resulting system is making men homeless, working them to death, taking them away from their children, and slowly, and sometimes very quickly, killing them. We don't particularly support any social expectations that subjugate men's health, safety, and freedom in favor of women's interests. We just don't oppose the right of married couples to make their own decisions regarding their own relationships and how their own households are run, unlike gender feminists, who absolutely do. So why do they make that accusation against us? Many of them, especially gender feminists who, like Anita Sarkeesian, criticize choice feminism, hold the belief that prior to feminist intervention around the time of World War II, women weren't allowed to work. The problem is, that's just not true. That belief relies on ignoring women's involvement in the textile industry, which transformed the American labor force from being mainly family labor and apprenticeship to wage labor. Women were also involved in areas we now think of as traditionally male. An account from Great Britain's Parliamentary Papers, 1842, Volume 16, shows that at least one politician was appalled to see Welsh girls and women facing the same conditions as men in English coal mines. Further down that page, a woman describes the work and goes on to state that it was even harder to do while pregnant, as she put it, in a family way. Women's complaints about these conditions led to regulation of mining companies' use of women in the mines for decades in nations influenced by British law, a condition feminists mistakenly blame on men. Feminists also ignore women's historical involvement in American business, like that of Mary Catherine Goddard, respected Revolutionary War printer and postmistress who published the first printed copies of the Declaration of Independence, and chemist and entrepreneur Anne Turnbow Malone, who became a millionaire by successfully developing and marketing hair products for black women in St. Louis prior to World War I. Malone then helped fund the rise of Sarah Walker, also known as Madam C.J. Walker, who developed a line of cosmetics and hair care products for black women and also became a millionaire. Both women were also generous philanthropists, giving back to the communities that supported their success. Eliza Lucas Pinckney, born in 1722, is known for introducing blue indigo dye into continental North America. Women like Estee Lauder and Coco Chanel created whole empires around women's fashion and makeup interests. Marjorie Merriweather Post, whose work grew her father's Post cereal company into a huge conglomerate, General Foods, changed the face of retail food sales forever by promoting and providing for the display of bird's-eye frozen foods in grocery stores. These women did not need a victim identity cult to support their achievements. They just saw work that needed to be done, a way to profit from it, and put the two together to pave their own roads to success, often building on the successes of those who had done similar work before them, just like men do. When feminists use Rosie the Riveter as a feminist symbol, they're actually kind of spitting on her legacy. Prior to World War II, women who did hard jobs did them out of need for income or as a result of their own ambitions, just like men. Most working women couldn't afford to be choosy because they were poor. Upper-class women didn't seek out jobs in coal mines and textile mills, take positions serving other households, or otherwise subject themselves to harsh labor. When they stayed at home, it was because they could, When they didn't, they engaged in activism, wrote or sought education, earned credentials, and took higher-end, higher-paying jobs. Rosie the Riveter was about women stepping up to fill roles vacated by men in the workforce who were drafted or volunteered to fight in the war. The effort was not so much a feminist initiative to change women's roles as it was a social response to suddenly changing labor needs. And it occurred, in part, because of something completely unrelated to feminism. The Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938, which dramatically altered the dynamics of the labor market. The law established a 44-hour work week, later shortened to the 40 we know today, and outlawed many existing child labor practices. These conditions, combined with the loss of male workers to the war effort, created the need for many more women to enter the manufacturing labor force, taking positions they normally would not have filled. The modern feminist back to the kitchen myth is more a protest of what happened when men returned from war and their employers wanted to give them their jobs back, while many women who had been temporarily filling those positions did not want to give up the income they received from them. Rather than acknowledge the complexity of the situation, feminists blamed sexism for women's loss of those jobs. This is not the only myth feminists perpetuate around women in the workplace. Their claims of sexism have extended to support for another myth. The claim that women earn 77 cents for every dollar a man earns doing the same work has been repeatedly and soundly debunked, most famously by the Consett Report. This report, which came out in January of 2009, was based on analysis of a variety of existing research on the topic. It concluded that the differences in the compensation of men and women are the result of a multitude of factors and that the raw wage gap should not be used as the basis to justify corrective action. Indeed, there may be nothing to correct. The differences in raw wages may be almost entirely the result of the individual choices being made by both male and female workers. This, of course, does not support feminism's discrimination narrative, and therefore has been largely ignored by feminist pundits and politicians. Even when reminded of the report's findings, these ideologues plod forward with their story as if that information didn't exist, as shown in narratives like Mel Magazine's article on the honey badgers, which referenced Anna Cherry's video on the topic and then followed it with repetition of the very myths she had articulately discredited. God forbid we actually listen to what an intelligent, educated woman has to say on the topic, not at least if she's a men's rights activist. Then it's time to give her a solid demonstration of what it's like to be talked over, because who is going to show her what the so-called patriarchy is like if not feminists? Simply put, there is no wage gap. The earnings gap that does exist is a result of specific choices that frankly women are more often privileged to make than men are. When you have two employees and one does the dirty, difficult, and dangerous tasks the other won't or can't, works longer hours, is more willing to work nights and weekends, picks up overtime or takes less time off, and is more flexible about his schedule overall than the other, that's not a condition of equal work. It's very much unequal. How do you get someone to be the first worker and not the other? When feminists promote the wage gap myth, they're either arguing against merit pay or workers' freedom to choose their own career and lifestyle. Why do I say that? Because you'd have to either end things like hazard and overtime pay, shift differentials, and other incentives to get people to choose jobs with those conditions over easier, cleaner, and more desirable ones. Or you'd have to take away the freedom of choice men and women are exercising that creates the existing earnings gap and the freedom of choice employers exercise when deciding what a particular job is worth to them. Imagine the impact on the economy that would have, and all for the sake of feminism's control over women's interests, another area of feminist social gatekeeping. The movement has basically sandwiched that controlling attitude between two ridiculous, stereotype-laden myths in order to stifle both sexes' autonomy over their own lives. Maybe they should stop calling themselves pro-choice.